Okay, got it. Number 8, same thing I thought. All right, so I'm going to start with some tips to improve your academic writing. So if you were at a previous lecture, I talked briefly about what makes a very good paragraph. And I said a good paragraph should have certainly the first three. The last T is optional, but would make it the best. So there should always be a topic sentence, which explains the main idea of the paragraph. Then there would be evidence or examples or both. Structure, so that within the paragraph, it like anybody reading it out loud or reading it in the mind quietly, it goes together in a organized fashion. And in the best paragraphs, because it's in the context of a whole paper or whole chapter, the different paragraphs fit together nicely. So there is a transition sentence between, or there's a concluding sentence if it's the last paragraph in the whole paper. So that's just a reminder. Anybody has a question about that? So this is a repeat of something I said before. So now I had said some tips to, I need to admit people. Right, I had said some tips for the concept paper. And I'm not going to go through it anymore, but I had some tips and these are they. So I need to actually put this up on I'm just going to talk about tips for literature review. So the tips for the concept paper were rock, and there's and the most important thing was that you should have established a research gap. The paper should be organized. It should be coherent between the different sections, and it should have citations that are also shown in your reference list. So I'm going to give a similar set of components for the literature review. By the end of your literature review, you should always establish your research gap. So the organization of a literature review is that you have an introduction, a body, and a summary. And that summary always has research gap. But the research gap is not the first time you're bringing it up. As you write the paper, you'd be discovering, as in your writing at some point, you would have mentioned that there is these research gaps. So you must have a research gap in literature review. Lots of people mistake, they're going straight to the local context. There must be reference to the global context, unless there's no papers on the global context. So you want to be neither too narrow or too broad, and that comes with practice. So you're going to need to ask your tutor or your lecturer for feedback on that. You want to be organized, that's also a requirement. So you can figure that out by using an outline or testing it by reading the topic sentence of each paragraph. You want to have the sections fit together well. And in the literature review, there are only 3 basic sections. The introduction. Yes?
Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Oh, no, I thought I was. Sorry about that. Oh, so sorry. So I told you about test, topic sentence, evidence and example, structure, and transition. Now we're talking about the tips to improve literature review, also rock. So there's several R's and several, but 1 O and several C's. So you need to have the research gap be established. That's normally at the very end. It's by the end of the paper, you would have established a research gap. This is actually the most important part of what you're doing this review. I mean, yes, you are going to be able to have some kind of comprehensive, maybe I could even put that into. I did not even put in. I think I should. I don't think I should put it here as a separate point. Which comprehensive. I think I'll put it here. Review. I think that would make it better. So I was going to also put comprehensive as a separate point, but it's really not. So there should be references to both the global and local context. It should be organized. It should be coherent. And the introduction. So this review has 3 sections: an introduction, a body, and a summary. And the body is just like each section, like the sections of the document, of the paper. So as you all know, you actually have a concept paper. What I suggest to everybody is that the major points, the major paragraphs in your concept paper become the body of your work, but there's usually additional things that will be added. So you have an introduction, the body, and you never put the word body anywhere in the paper, but the bulk of this literary review is called the body. So you have the introduction, the body, and the summary, and the whole thing should fit together. So I also note that literary review should never answer the research question. Do you all know why this is the case?
Not sure, teach.
Nobody knows. This is so critical. Yeah, this is so critical, it's not even funny. So the literary review, so remember the research question in your concept note or questions are things that scholars, experts don't know the answer to. So since experts don't know the answer to, if it is that the literature can definitively answer the research question, then they need to change the research question, because research questions are ones that we don't know the answer to yet. So for example, it could be that the reason, like, so it may be that you need to add something like in Jamaica, or you may need to, I don't even know, but if the review can answer the question, something is wrong. And this will take a whole, this is take a whole another discussion, which I'm not getting into here. But this is a critical, and I found that all the way up to major project, when people pass CRM, somehow they forget this. This is something that is super critical, that needs to be no mistake about it. So for example, here's a typical thing. Let's say somebody wants to look at, I don't know, give me a topic. Give me your topic, guys. Anybody, a topic that you're currently doing as your project.
The chatbots.
Oh, the same one every time in the same class? Wow. Okay, so one of my groups is doing chatbots and depression. If one of their researchers that they put down was, let me see, like, how prevalent are chatbots used in the Americas? And if that's already in the literature, that's not, whatever, in the USA, I don't even know how they would put it like that. But if it is that there's already information about that, that's not a good research question. Yeah, you might in the literature review, or, as in your background or literature review, may want to talk about prevalence. Yes? But if it is that is already clearly answered in the literature, that's not a good research question. It's what I want to call a literature review question, but it wouldn't be in your concept paper as a question. It could be something like, what is the technology acceptance of chatbots among adolescents in Jamaica? That is something that's probably not in the literature. Or another one that might be good is, what is the effectiveness of chatbots among elderly persons? Maybe because there is nothing, there might be a paucity, meaning not much, a paucity of literature about chatbots among elderly persons. Or let's go back to the same effectiveness. If you want to know about depression among adolescents, and there already are several papers, but some papers show that it's effective and others show that it has no effect, then that means that the literature is contradictory. And so it actually still is a good question to say, what is the effectiveness of chatbots among adolescents? Why? Because we don't know yet, because the papers are controversial. But the point is, if the scholarly literature can answer your research question, the research question in your concept needs to be changed. Everybody getting me? Anybody getting me?
Yes.
And
Yes,
another
teach.
mistake people tend to write is that love to like write these how-to questions, like how do you create a chat box? That's not a research question. That's just basic. People know how to create a chat box already. It's really a matter of like, it is maybe what are the components of the chat box that will be most effective, but it's not what you write, like how does AI work, or no, people love to write these like how-to questions that are really already known by experts. So yeah, so you have to be careful how you form that. And so remember, there should be a relationship between the concept note and the literature review. Anyway, so back to my things about what is components of a very good literature review. It should be current. This is an optional thing, but the best literature reviews would, but it depends on your topic, So if your topic is not exciting, then it won't have either controversy or emerging technology. But the best topics either are on emerging technology or some controversy in the scholarly literature. But this is not required, just best. And then this review should have citations, preferably of high quality, in every paragraph in the body. So you don't need to have any citations in the intro, that's up to you. You don't need, in fact, it's really, you don't have citations in the summary because you summarize it. But you must, it's an option. So those citations are going to include systematic reviews and meta-analysis if they exist. Landmark papers, which are ones that have a high level of citations, and recent studies. That's what you're looking for. So when I say high quality, it should be peer-reviewed papers, so like, so it's, like I should probably put peer-reviewed paper, peer-reviewed, be more precise. And so according to me, the literature review, in my mind, has a research gap, which you identify at the end. Your references are both global and local. It is well organized. It is coherent, meaning it fit together in a way that everybody can read and say, yeah, this makes sense. And you have citations throughout the paper. And then I just see, this is not going to work. Right, and then I just did this, yeah. So, and then I just found this paper, I just found this reference right here. This is nice. So let's open it, copy. Hopefully it's still open right here. This, I don't know how to make this bigger. Yes, we should make it bigger. So this literary literature is probably good for the class. It's a long line what I'm telling you. So the paper must be in APA format. You must have, I suggest 15 to 25 references, but it could be 12. But the problem with 12 is if you have 12 substandard references, you're going to get a bad grade for the paper. So I suggest 15 to 25. We actually don't need an abstract for this review for our assignment, but if it did have one, it should have these components. Yes, Brittany? Or this review for the assignment does not have abstract.
Question about the references may say that you're doing a topic and you're not finding a lot of sources in the 5-year period. Is it possible for us to use sources lower than the 5-year period?
Yeah, man, there's no rule of a 5-year period. But listen to what I just put in on. If you go back to my thing, I would say yes in 2 ways. So here, I don't know if it's your teacher told you that. Sorry, look what I wrote. I wrote current. So this is typically recent studies usually means less than or equal to 5 years. Depending on the field, depending on the topic. And this part is actually important, but usually, this is usually, most times. Yeah, I put usually. So I put 3 things: systematic reviews. So if there's a systematic review that's 7 years old, it's definitely going to include it no matter what. Even, of course, if you have more recent ones, generally, if you have any systematic reviews in the last 10 years, you want to include them. Landmark papers, if they made a massive difference in the field, they might be worthy of inclusion. So, and recent studies. So I just gave you 3 guidelines, but let me give you one that I know that they tend to be, they were up to a few years ago, not recent studies, but I think people have started again. So, Hello, who is? Why is somebody having the mic open without having a question? Or that was the person with the question. Right. So there was a lot of interest among students a few years ago in writing a paper on women in computer science. And when I helped the students look, there really were almost no papers at that time that were recent, but there were papers. And so since there actually were very few recent papers, in addition, whatever else they could find, maybe there were a couple of landmark papers, they had to use the papers that existed from before. So I'm going to say it definitely depends on the topic. But if you're going to be writing about blockchain, less than 5 years, computer security, which is hot, data science or data analytics, whatever you want to call it, anything that is like changing all the time, like my area of interest, digital health intervention, if most of your articles is not recent, something wrong with your paper. So it really depends on your topic, and if people are not publishing in that area, and back to my thing, if they're not publishing, then either it's not a controversy, or maybe you're, sometimes though, it's a very important topic, but people just don't happen to be publishing on it. Yes. So I back to it. It depends. Okay.
Yes, miss.
It didn't hear. I don't like this. Yes, miss thing. Okay. Back
Oh,
to.
sorry. I forgot. Yes, teach.
Back to this. So you're interrupted. So I'm saying I like this. This is not bad. Do the introduction. Do the first couple of paragraphs of the topic well. Is there interesting and relevant beginning to draw the reader in? Is there a preview of the topics to be covered in the paper? Then the body. Are the cited studies relevant? Are they presented appropriately? Are the studies integrated well? You're not supposed to just write, by the way, study A, study B, study C. You're supposed to like look at them collectively, critique them. You know, for example, let's say you had something about effectiveness of chat box in depression. Is it that you looked at 7 studies and those 7 studies, 5 found that chat box worked well and 2 that they had no effect? Before we talk about any particular study, you would talk about what is the overall finding. Yes? A lot of students just talk about this study said, and don't give any integration of the studies. It's supposed to be analyzing, not just reporting. Just reporting, your teacher can give you a C, because merely reporting is a summary. We're asking for much more than a summary. It's supposed to be deep, not shallow. It's supposed to have levels of detail, but yeah, I guess I could say more about that, but let's just move on. But at the end of it, the reader, when they read the paper, should get a good idea of what the state of research is now in that topic area. So to organize, have headings, have you organized the studies in a way that people make sense, and then there's some, you know, how you write it, and at the conclusion, you must have a summary, suggestions for further research. Basically, this is what your project is going to be about. So at the end of the study, you're going to be talking about there is some gap. So I don't mind this checklist. So we're going to move on from there. Since your list review should be due soon. Okay, so we're going to move from here now, unless somebody has a pressing question, to qualitative, no, that's not it. Qualitative research. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong thing. Qualitative research. Yes. So with qualitative research, as you know, that is non-numeric data. There are various approaches that can be used. They include surveying, interviewing, and observation. And the questionnaires would be open-ended. You have interview schedules and observation schedules and checklists. So for all of them, you must have instruments that like clearly tell anybody who's involved in the study, because typically in studies, you have more than one person collecting data, exactly how it will go. So any of these 3 data collection tools that are common for qualitative have their pros and cons. So we're going to talk about them. So interviewing. So interview can be in various methods, face-to-face, telephone, online. And the advantage is it has a lot of detailed data, and the person asking the question, the interviewer, can ask for clarification and can probe. If it's face-to-face, you can monitor the body language, or I guess even if it's online and you look at Zoom or some other video conferencing tools. But it's very time consuming, and even the transcription can take long, because if you use software, there might be need to edit the transcription. So, and then the qualitative analysis is time consuming. By the way, there actually is software that can help with qualitative analysis, but it's still more time consuming than quantitative analysis, just straight up. The ethics, because qualitative tends to be getting more information, it's much more important that anonymity be maintained, but often it can't be maintained if you're actually looking at the person. However, confidentiality should always be maintained. So if the person is actually something that is not to report, then you don't. But by the way, anonymity is also an issue sometimes in quantitative. That's exactly why when I did the Jamaica Lifestyle Survey, I was asked to be a participant. In fact, just a couple of days ago, I was participating for another study. I'm a family member has dementia, and I agreed to be in that study. And I've agreed to be in both the quantitative and qualitative part of the study. And basically, I actually trust the person. When I was in front of the people with lifestyle, some little young people that I just looked at them and I thought they were asking some really, not there, no, the study asked some really personal details. Like the first, it was long. The first, oh, it was fine. And then they got into some I just said, excuse me, is there a supervisor? And they tell me, oh, it's all right because they were trained in the ethics. I said, no disrespect. I'm not going to continue to answer these questions unless I see the supervisor. So the point is, tell me they're trained in ethics did not mean that they're not going to be. So I wanted to study, but I just wanted to be with somebody I could trust. So at the end of it, for anonymity to be maintained, it's all about the person as a participant trusting the people. And then at the end of it, obviously the people who are the researchers should also do the right thing and not disclose anything about the people involved. So with interviews now, they can be done one-on-one or in a group. The group is called the focus group. In interviews, you have 3 types: structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. No matter what way you're going to do, there should be an interview schedule. So even in an unstructured interview, there should be some theme that you've written down in advance, that you know that this is the things that you want to do, even though the whole thing is going to be unstructured. So as I just said, there are different types of interviews. Obviously, structured interviews are the most like a quantitative approach. It really depends on the nature of the study as to what is best. So especially if little is known in the area. So remember now, before you get to the point of observation, interviews, you would have read the literature in this area. So it will be a combination of what is known about the kind of people who answer these questions and the nature of the research questions as to which is best. You follow me, guys? So like if more is known, then you might be able to get away with structured or semi-structured. If very little is known, unstructured or semi-structured tend to be better. Everybody sees why? As in, if you know, if the world knows about whatever is being done, it's more likely you're going to be able to come up with a well-composed, structured interview. However, if nothing is known and you start interviewing, you might end up falling into all kinds of things that you never planned for. So sometimes in that case, unstructured or semi-structured would be better. So anyway, but at the end of it, there's implication. So with a structured interview, you have a really clear schedule, just like a questionnaire, except that you put them in a preset manner, no variation. You don't allow the people to just answer those questions and nothing else. In an unstructured interview, you basically have themes, and it's really the interviewer says not much. It just basically make the respondents stay on target related to the project at hand. In a semi-structured, you have a number of questions that have been written down, but depending on how the interviewee answers the question, the researcher then decides to prompt them to see if they will say more or probe. So they said something, they said, well, what could they say more about that? So prompts is, many people said this, what's your views of this? And probes is, the person said a particular thing, tell me more about that. So you tend to have probes, especially if they say something that's quite unusual. So generally speaking, with an interview, you should pilot it. So just like in quantitative projects where you have a quantitative questionnaire, as in what I mean by a quantitative questionnaire, if a questionnaire is one where everything is structured and every single answer is finite, every answer is just yes, no, or a Likert scale, or male, female, etc. You know, your demographics, like demographics could be which parish you live in Jamaica. So every single question in the survey is specific. Basically, people are choosing between a number of options. A questionnaire should be piloted, usually for clarity and for figuring out if it takes too long or kind of things like that. Similarly, interviews should be piloted as well, because you want to make sure that people will take to your questionnaire, that it makes sense. All of that is good to practice interviewing. In fact, on this note, I taught a course last semester which was research methods, and I couldn't believe I needed to teach those students how to interview. So really, I realized that interviewing is certainly a skill. We don't have much time to talk about this. I have to make sure I finish the class on time. So certainly you need to understand what interviewing is and practice it. Right. Recording interviews is best, but you always need to get the explicit permission usually in writing. But if it's online, it could be that the person essentially sends an electronic signature or clicks a form, but there still should be some way that they have consented. So you can either manually record or electronically record. And if the people object to being recorded, what do you do? Sorry, I'm asking the class. Well, you have a choice. Either you're going to decide not to include that person in the study and tell them thanks for being willing to participate, but we only want to record people. So it's either that, or you have somebody who's there who's taking notes. But at the end of it, interviews should be things that you're going to be taking careful notes and preferably recording. But certainly for sure, you're not going to secretly record them. That's not a okay answer. So it's like, oh, we're going to record them without their knowing. That is breach of ethics. So if you record it, you should really basically use transcriptions. And typically what is done with those transcriptions are, well, it depends on how much the interview is. Sometimes those transcriptions are placed at the back as an appendix as part of the final project. It really depends, but at the end of it, that electronic recording is actually analyzed for patterns. So move on to the next type. There is focus groups. So focus groups are essentially a group interview. You typically don't go beyond 12 persons in a focus group because it gets very hard to manage, but you actually want everybody to be talking and to be comfortable. So you need to have prepare the persons and say what this project is about and give them the rules and make sure everybody is comfortable. And then you need to prepare yourself, and there always in a focus group needs to be an assistant. In the interview, it's best to have an assistant to help, but in a focus group, it's a must. In fact, it's even better to have more than one assistant because you definitely need somebody to be taking notes. So in a focus group, in a best case scenario, you have a recording and you have at least one assistant taking notes, because the person leading the interview cannot be taking notes and doing all of that. That's maybe possible in an interview, given if you have like limited resources. So before the interview, you're going to greet the people, get them at ease, have them sign the consent forms. If you remember from the ethics presentation last week, we told you that they're typically, with human participants, 3 different forms. There's a letter to participants telling them what the research is about, which you normally also explain verbally. And there's also a informed consent form, which would say, again, what the study is for, any risk, and then they would sign the form, or you could do it electronically. If you want to collect demographic information as part of the thing that would be collected, check the recording, and you start what it's about, establish the ground rules. During the interview, you basically need to do all what is required. And what is interesting in a focus group is you want to not just ask questions and have prompts and probes. You want to monitor body language, monitor the time, because you don't want to keep people there beyond. You told them half an hour, you making sure you're sticking to half an hour. At 30 minutes, you say, oh, could have gone for 3 more minutes. You keep to what you said. And then if depending on the type of focus group, you may have a debriefing session. That's normally typically only if it's something that's psychologically challenging. If it's not, you just normally tell them thanks for being part of the focus group, and then you write it up about your thoughts, impressions, download the recording and transcribe it, etc. So with interviews, whether it is focus groups or individual, you must prepare pilot instrument. Well, pilot instruments means a set of questions. Practice, make sure equipment is working, give the participants control of the device, meaning if they're not willing to do that. My general thinking is if people are not willing to be recorded, depending on the project, maybe you don't want them to be involved, but sometimes you actually don't have enough participants. So you can just go ahead and just take notes. Clearly you want to respect the wishes of the respondent. And if they want, you can send a copy of the transcribed interview for amendments. You don't ask leading questions. So a leading question right now would be, oh, this class is exciting, isn't it? As opposed to, what do you think of computing research methods? That's not a leading question. You shouldn't be overly emotional. Never tell the people that they like, if you think that they are. And you only record if people give consent. And so here's a very simple interview schedule. Tell me what you know about computers. What are some places where computers are used? Do you own a computer? What do you use a computer for? How often do you use it? How do you feel about it? What do you like about it? Or what do you like to do best and least? What you dislike and like about the computer? And apparently some questions about it in schools, which you can read. Should they be used in schools? Would you like to spend more time on the computer in school? Yeah, so can computer help people learn maths? Do you play mathematical games? I wonder who this is for. So like it's for some children based on that set of questions. So, interview questions. And by the way, you see how these questions are rather simple. So they look like questions that are probably for either persons who are teenagers or children or people without higher educational levels. Because I would think, depending, but I mean, nothing's wrong with these still, but if we were asking students, we might ask these questions a little bit more sophisticated way, maybe. I don't know. So do you think the computer will help you to learn math? I don't know. I think I would ask students something like, do you think you can use computer devices to help you with your, math classes? I don't know what I would put it, but it's just so like that question is written for university students. Not sure how I'd rewrite it. Anyway, so with observations, now typically in SCIT, there are usually not many projects that have observations, but it's certainly possible. So with observation, you basically look for what is actually happening. Maybe it's actually looking at what is happening. The challenges with observation, if the observer knows that you're there, the effect of the observer changes what happens. I mean, even when it's not research, I remember doing a class where I was learning students. I was the first year at UTech, or second year at UTech, I was doing a diploma in education, and this external examiner came to review my classes. And certainly it seemed to me that how the class went actually differed, because everybody noticed that there was a strange man in the class. You know, so definitely it was just, I think it affected how I interacted and also how the students interacted. And then if the researcher has a bias, that can affect what data he or she collects. And then there are rating errors. Some can be error of leniency. So like, for example, I've seen projects where I have students who are, that's not index students. You have people who say, oh, well, I know that, I don't know, UE students are bright, and they go to UE students to observe. Let's go to a good example with education. Go to UE and say, well, I expect UE students to be bright. So I go there, listen to their questions, and say, oh yes, weren't they great? And the person goes to NCU, and I guess apparently they don't think NCU is so good. And they go there and say, no, not so good. The point is, there are all kind of biases that a person can have depending on what's on their head. So the idea is to be objective. So there can be an error of central tendency where you just put everybody in a similar fashion, even though you're trying to distinguish between individuals, and there can be a halo effect based on any particular variable. And then the observation can have contamination about all kind of matters. It can be very time consuming, and so that can obviously be a disadvantage. And so observations are either overt or covert. So overt is the most common, as in people know that being observed. Covert is that they don't know that they're being observed. And certainly all projects that are research should be approved by a research ethics committee, which is called the Institutional Review Board in the US. And certainly for covert observation, obviously there needs to be justification to the ethics committee. Why would covert observation be ethical? Well, there are situations where if you tell the people up front that they're being observed, their behavior changes. So there are situations where it's okay, and I gave examples last week. There could be something where you're trying to figure out about how people behave in terms of like their cybersecurity habits, and that it will only be ethical to do it if it's sort of in some artificial environment, because if you're actually watching them in their real environment, that could be problematic too, because then maybe have access to their real passwords and all of that. So there are some situations where covert observation would be ethical, but it really depends. So with overt participant observation, you need to have time to start, because once people get used to being there, they forget that you're observing them. However, you need to make sure as a observer that you be as objective as possible. And so there's this concept of something called triangulation, where you use data from more than one source. So if you have questionnaires or several observers, so there are different ways to get triangulation done, but if you try and get the data from more than one source, it's less likely to be inaccurate. Just one observer might be problematic. And we already said this before, so if people know that they're being observed, they tend to behave differently. And then non-participant observation, you have checklists, and you have different possibilities: Hawthorne effect, Halo effect, and John Henry effect. So in the Hawthorne effect, the people's behavior are altered because they know they're being studied. We already said that. It's called the Hawthorne effect. The Halo effect is that when you consider a person good or bad in one category, you're likely to make similar evaluation in other categories. So maybe you think this person is good in math, and then you see them in another setting making a presentation, and even though they're not good at presentations, you just somehow say, oh, this is a good student. So they should, you know, without thinking, it's normally these things are unconscious or subconscious biases. And then the John Henry effect, which is obviously after a man named John Henry, is that you have an experiment. So if you remember what an experiment is, it's one where you have a experimental group and a control group. So let's say my experiment was to give people smartwatches to see if it would increase physical activity. And some people have smartwatches and let me see now. Let me try this a different way. Okay, so some people have smartwatches and they're getting some, I don't know, some prompts. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it correctly. All right, so some people have smartwatches and they're interacting with some coaches that are trying to tell them, you need to do more exercise all the time. And then the control group also has the wearables, but they don't have any prompts. But the control group know that they're in a project measuring exercise. So they say, oh, these people are measuring how much I do exercise and I don't want to look like a sedentary person. And so they start to walk more and go to the gym more just for the month that they're in it. And as soon as the experiment finishes, they go back to what they normally do. So that's the John Henry effect. So you need to be trying whatever you can do to make that less likely to happen. And there are actually all kinds of ways to look at that, including there's something called the crossover effect. So there are things you can do to see if you can reduce the John Henry effect. So with observation, you want to prepare, you have an instrument, you pilot it. If several people are involved, you train them to ensure that the data collected is going to be similar, so that ensures reliability, meaning if you were to do the whole research study again, you're going to get similar results. That's what reliability is about. If there's a rate of scale, you want to make sure that people are using the same way, so you train them and make sure that they're giving similar responses to something before you actually do it in the actual study. And you ask all the researchers to take field notes, and then you look at the field notes and record your impressions and feelings. So videotaping is good for observations, and here's a checklist for a observation. So like this is for teaching. The teacher uses language appropriate. Teachers use questions to elicit responses from the students. Teachers use examples, teaching aids, clarify points. Oh, here we go. Students ask the teacher questions. That's what I want to know, why this don't happen more in this class. I think one person asked a question earlier. Students question each other about the material. There must be a tutorial. Students work together to solve problems, etc. So these are checklists for apparently a teaching class. And so whatever instrument you use, the goal is to have the data collected being valid and reliable. Remember, valid means that it is accurate, and reliable means that if you were to do the study again, you will get similar data. The reason I say similar is because since you're not doing a census, it's a subset called a sample. Typically, when you repeat the study, or if somebody were to repeat the study, if it was well done and rigorous, they would get similar answers, not identical. So since we want valid and reliable, generally speaking, if possible, we should reuse pre-existing instruments, although of course we should test them first. Why? Because pre-existing instruments tend to be already tested for reliability, and as such they're better than you coming up with something from scratch. So there's a concept called building on the shoulders of giants. If there's already excellent research instruments in the field, the idea is that you should really be writing for permission to use that instrument. So validity is the degree to which the instrument measures what it's supposed to. So for example, our tests. So if you wanted to find out if, like we just talked to us earlier about using chat box for depression, Well, there are actually already a number of screens for depression. So we want to make sure that the items on the depression questionnaire are actually going to test that. So whatever it is, if you wanted to find out if you're using computer games to see if people will get better academic performance, you want to make sure that whatever test you do before and afterwards is actually going to be measuring people's learning of the skill. Otherwise, if it's just a silly test that doesn't test what it's supposed to, it's no use. So the different kinds of validity: content validity, which is that it measures what it's supposed to measure; construct. So sometimes, for example, IQ. IQ is a construct, meaning what is intelligence, guys? Anybody? It's a concept that we have, and we actually, in order to measure it, we have to come up with a whole long list of items that is supposed to measure intelligence. And the reason why many people, when you can look up papers, critique the IQ test is that it seems to be, shows that people of ethnic groups that are not common tend to do worse in those tests. Is it really the case that, I don't know, Hispanics, people with dark skin color are not as intelligent as Caucasians? I think not. It is most likely that the IQ test is biased based on a number of factors. Like, it's basically about how long have you been in an educational system. Anyway, that's my take. I don't know what you all take, but sorry, you can look it up. The people who do IQ tests, you can actually see it's not similar across ethnic groups. So the thing is, does it have perfect construct validity? Possibly not. Not right now anyway. And then there's criterion related validity. Two types: concurrent and predictive. So does the instrument you compare with similar instruments? And predictive, does the instrument predict how well you perform in the future? So both of those are important. And then there's reliability, which is the degree to which the test consistently measures what it's supposed to measure. So if you want to know if, I don't know, if I know how to use, not even sure what, let's just go back to, if you want to know my Suzanne Muir's current understanding, in other words, current understanding of computing research methods, what is the best way to do that? I'm actually not even so sure that the kind of test that we give in this class is the best way to measure it. But the point is, if it's not, then it's not a reliable test. So whatever test we do, I actually think that a reliable test for most academic things would be some kind of interview. Why do you think undergraduates doesn't use interviews for testing in general? Anybody? Class don't want to talk. Let's say that interview, like an open-ended question would be a more reliable way of testing people than a written test. This is hypothesize. Why we don't do that? Nobody has a response to me? But I can tell you one thing for sure. If that was even the case, it's just way too inconvenient and expensive. It's not feasible to be interviewing everybody. And even some teachers who do sometimes give an assignment and then interview, it's taking up a lot of time. So the teachers who decide to do that, it's not a efficient way. And then also there's a possibility of the interview also being biased. Anyway, so there are different types of reliability. Test, retest. If you give the person a test over time, do you get the same response? Within one test, you can actually test a particular content more than once. So like, what be a good thing? Like in computing research method, we have different topics. So let's just go to like simple things. So if I want to know if people understand like what is a research question versus what's the literature review versus some stuff about methods. I could have a number of questions about literature review in the test that really are asking the same thing in different ways. And any question that's asking the same thing in different ways, that would be equivalent forms reliability. So sometimes people do that in order to see if the test at one time is reliable. And then this is similar, the split half reliability and how well do the items hang together, so you can actually see if the test as a whole estimates whatever you're trying to test. And then there are others, so you have the rational equivalence reliability to see if there's an internal consistency by seeing how all the tests relate to each other. And then there's a scorer, so when you have somebody scoring the test, because there are some, like for example, like in our major project, we actually have scorers. We can see like how similar the scores are to each other. Sometimes it's very close and sometimes it's not. So then you can basically work out the reliability by a correlation coefficient. The closer it is to 1 or -1, the more reliable the instrument, because you know correlation varies from -1 to 1. Once it's close to 1 or -1, those things are strong associations. We don't have enough time right now to get into the philosophical issues of research. So maybe next time we can talk about that. Yeah. Any questions? Oh, by the way, as if people put on the screen after start, you can't see your screen. I don't tend to be able to see.